Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Al, for what's, in fact, a very helpful introduction to what we'll look at this morning. We're going through a series in looking at Jesus' messages, now moving towards Jesus talking as he approaches the cross. And today we've got quite a tough message, both to process and to hear, if you see what I mean. Signs of the end of the age. It's complicated, and we'll try and somehow simplify out of it what Jesus wants us to hear, but also it's very challenging, because he says things that, whereas last week you could just deflect and say, well, it was the scribes and the Pharisees who were the terrible bunch, and so, these words aren't really for me. Now he's speaking to his disciples about words that are for everybody, and we can't dodge them. So it's going to be quite difficult truth to hear. It's also very relevant truth. I think for most of my life it's been quite possible to just say, no, it's okay, these things are a very long way off. But now people are asking questions about how the world will end. What's going to happen? Will it be global conflict? Will it be the climate crisis? Will it wipe out everything, or will it just be a few? Will it be like the end of the dinosaurs? Or will there be something else? And will it be soon? And so there's another aspect to this. It's a very challenging message that, for those of you who are followers of volcanoes, will Yellowstone blow before the end of my life? Those kind of questions. But Jesus has answers for his disciples, questions that the disciples had. So Dan is going to come and read our passage to us. It will be helpful to have a Bible. There should be one near you. Chapter 24 of Matthew, and we're reading the first 35 verses. So Dan.
Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. "Do you see all these things?" he asked. "I tell you the truth, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. "Tell us," they said, "when will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming at the end of the age, and of the end of the age?" Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But he who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of his house go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I have told you ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, 'There he is,' out in the desert, do not go out, or 'Here he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much. In that passage, you hear two things. You hear prediction of things that are going to happen within that generation. And we'll see in a moment that those are things that indeed did happen, prophecies fulfilled. And we see other things in that passage that cannot be for that generation. They have to be for future times. And again, we will look at that. But that's one of the challenges within this passage. That Jesus, as actually is the case with other prophecy and is the case with Revelation, mixes immediate advice that is for people within their own time period, the disciples and those around them, and he also speaks then about things that are much longer term and for us and have not yet been revealed. The context of the passage is really important too. Jesus has just left the temple for the last time. And he's been in the temple saying some very hard truths that we heard last week. And one of the words that Al used that's in the passage that really strikes me is that word desolate. Desolate, empty, abandoned. He's talked about the religion of the day and the religious leaders of the day, and he said God is now gone from this. It's over. It's finished. Your nation state, as it were, and the temple that's the center of that religion, that is now left utterly, utterly empty. And then he tells the disciples that the temple, which again has been the center of their religious order of the day, is going to be utterly destroyed. And just pause for a moment and think, what would that mean to you? We don't quite have an equivalent, but perhaps it's a bit like saying the Tower of London and Westminster Abbey and St. Paul's, and you're going to go to London next time. Use your Oyster card, and what you'll find is just ruins. Empty, gone. Your nation, House of Commons included, gone. Overrun, finished. They're bound to ask big questions about it. When's it going to happen? Is it going to happen in my lifetime? Is it going to happen soon? You've already talked about things that are going to come upon this generation. When you've talked to the high priest, you talk again in this passage, he talks about in this generation. When's it going to happen? One of the things I just want to say is that it's not comfortable being near Jesus if you are on the wrong side. It was not comfortable being near Jesus last week if you were a scribe or a Pharisee or part of that religious order that wasn't putting God as represented in Jesus at the center. Now the same thing is going to be true for those who don't follow him. It's not going to be comfortable to be on the wrong side. So let's look first of all at what's going to happen in their generation. And the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem was a real event by the Romans in AD 70. You see about it in verses 15 onwards. There's this really difficult thing where Jesus says, "So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel," let the reader understand. I love those words. Luke has it much more simply. He says, in a parallel passage to this, he says, "When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies." And in general, people take this to be when the Romans, in response to a Jewish rebellion in that period, finally overran the city. Jesus talks about it not being in, praying that it wouldn't be in the winter, praying that it wouldn't be on a Sabbath. Well, the siege of Jerusalem began roughly before Passover. It went on for 3 months. And if I can get the next slide to come up, that's an artist representation of the people flooding out of Jerusalem in their droves. Jerusalem left truly desolate. Fires were started, houses collapsed in on themselves, the temple burned and collapsed in on itself. The Romans wanted nothing left that this rebellious people would be able to occupy once again. It's a terrible thing to be a refugee. It's a terrible thing to know that you're leaving your home, your comfort, your protection. But it's more than that for these people as well. You're giving up the place where God dwelt. Probably what you think is the fulfillment of the prophecy is that God is going to go back into his temple, that your people are going to be free of the oppressors and going to be a world power once again. And Jesus is saying, truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until these things have happened. It gives a little challenge. Do our homes mean too much to us? Do we invest too much in our own protection and safety and comfort? Certainly was a word to me while I was preparing. Because there are people all over the world suffering like this. And that siege of Jerusalem was the most terrible siege. It went on for 3 months, and historians record the most awful things that happened during that siege. And I don't want to be political, and I don't want to be on anybody's side, but we're seeing a terrible siege at the moment. An utterly terrible siege. People over the world know what it is to be as those people were feeling as they fled from the walls of Jerusalem, never to return to it, taking nothing with them, all the things that Jesus predicted. And let's get that. It's important. When Jesus made a prophecy, it came true. It happened. He didn't say false words. And we'll see other prophecies in a minute, other parts of the prophecy. And so what he tells us about the end times, I think it says, listen up. Because what he said, he meant. So in the passage, I think we can find a number of warnings. Don't be deceived, don't be alarmed, and expect persecution. The first one is don't be deceived. Jesus says, watch out that no one deceives you. This is verse 4. Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming, I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. And later on in verse 24 he says, for false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. This word elect is used, God's people, God's chosen people, those who are on Jesus' side, Jesus' people. And he says, see, I have told you ahead of time. Now, there was historic evidence of false messiahs in that 100 years, less than 100 years, up to AD 70 when the temple was destroyed. There was a warning there for the disciples that people will come before that date and say, we can fix this nation problem, religion problem, we are God's representative to you. But it's not only about then. And there's a real warning here for all of us. But just going back to perhaps my own university days, okay, that was prehistory, but a warning about following those who make promises and give offers of things that just are not right and are not of God. In other words, be careful not to get caught up in cults. Get careful not to get caught up in those who call themselves churches that make false promises, false prophecies, false predictions. Looking at Google, dear old Google, an example of a young man in Australia and how he'd been met at a railway station when he first arrived to go to university, and how he had been drawn in to something that it took him months to realize was not a Christian church and was not of Christ. We can name groups that are out there trying to draw people in to believe in false prophets and false messiahs and false ways of worshipping God. And I think the passage offers us a really helpful couple of touch points about that. At the center of what Dan read us, Jesus always points to himself and his second coming. Jesus is at the center of this passage. Does the faith group point you to Jesus or to something else? Does it point you to Jesus through the Bible, or does it point you to something else? Has it put a person in the place that Jesus should have as the head of the church? Has it even set up somebody effectively equal to the Bible or to the truth of Jesus? Are these people seeking to love and glorify Jesus, or are they looking for something in place, even miracle signs and wonders sometimes? Above all, do they teach that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that none shall come to the Father except through him? It's a relevant warning because it's real and it's out there. It may not feel it's real and out there, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if there aren't groups in Oxford trying to do similar things. And it's a big warning from Jesus. It's a big warning about was it David Koresh and the Branch Davidians? Anybody remember that horror in Texas? There's been a guy in Kenya recently who has led to a lot of people dying because he preached a false connection, false prophecy, false Messiah. Be on your guard. If you're unsure, check. Check them out, look them up, look what they've got on their websites, find out what they're saying. If need be, talk to somebody. But avoid just that being drawn in. Okay, so the second warning is don't be alarmed. Sorry if what I just did sounded a bit alarming. Don't be alarmed. But this is don't be alarmed about the wars and rumors of wars, the nations rising up against nations, the kingdoms rising up against kingdoms, the famines and earthquakes in various places. As I said earlier, it feels as if the end of the age might be near. It feels as if these many things are happening that are out of control. But what does Jesus say to you this morning? He says, don't be alarmed. Don't be alarmed. It's not easy advice to take. And the one thing I want to say is that he doesn't say, don't be alarmed, and by the way, don't do anything. You can just sit back. You've got to read it against his other teaching. You've got to read it against the fact later on, I think next week and the week after, in the second half of this chapter and the chapter that follows, there's advice about being good servants, preparing and waiting actively for Jesus to return. It's not don't be alarmed and just be passive. But let's think about the ways in which we can respond. Respond to the people who are suffering at this moment as a consequence of these conflicts. Respond with care about our environment, because people are struggling and suffering because of the impact of our ways of life in different ways. Pray for those who are peacemakers. We were doing that in the mission group this morning. Pray for those who are peacemakers and have an opportunity to work within these conflicts. Pray for those who care about justice and righteousness. Cyril sets us that wonderful example about care for those who are refugees. Don't be alarmed. And I think Jesus says don't be alarmed, because if you're alarmed, you can't be active. You run around like a headless chicken. You don't know what you're meant to be doing. But if you are able to come back to him and say, give me calm, then we can respond. There's another hard warning. I'm sorry, we're piling them up one on another this morning, but they're here in the passage. Expect persecution and its consequences. That's verses 9 to 13. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. Well, here's the hope in it. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. Well, a prophecy that was fulfilled for the early church. We read about it in Acts. We read about it through the letters, and we read about it. We know it's true through history as well. Handed over to be persecuted and put to death, hated by all nations. That was the case early on. And as I read this, I want to cry out, surely not, Lord Jesus. Surely it doesn't need to be like this. Surely we're on your side, and your side is the winning side. It doesn't need to be like this. Surely you're the one who can make everything just get better and better on a nice, steady kind of incremental slope until ultimately you come again. Surely it doesn't have to work like this. But it does. And we see it happening in the world today. And there's a tension for us, because we want to work to make things better and better, and we want to pray for things getting better and better. But God is saying, my plan includes suffering and trouble for those who follow me, those who own me. There's an uncomfortable question for us, and that is, how much would I give up to follow Jesus? How far would I go to follow Jesus? What can I do today for those who are suffering persecution? For those who are seeking to aid those who are suffering persecution? Would I, challenge to myself, go so far with my time or my budget until actually it started to hurt, rather than it being just from the top 10%? Have you ever felt called to go to a people far away? Have you ever felt to go somewhere where the comforts are stripped away from you? Perhaps speaking to the younger among us who have more opportunity, but there's others amongst us who have gone, who will go, who know what it means to do that. Perhaps you're not called to that, but you might be called to work with those who are persecuted or to help those who are going. But then, hang on, this is the excellent part of it. This is the wonderful news. In chapter 24 and verse 14 we read, following on from those verses about persecution, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. And so the promise is being fulfilled. And we hear of the church growing in Iran or in China or in those other places where there really is a huge cost to following Jesus. The good news of Jesus will and is going out to all nations. Oops, go the wrong way. The second piece of news here is that no one will miss the second coming of Jesus. Chapter 24, verses 30 to 32, for instance. At that time, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and with great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. We don't need to be checking out every possible weirdo Messiah as being the one who means the real Jesus. We won't mistake him. We will have no alternative but to recognize that he's here. That's what he's saying. And that's for all nations and for all people. He doesn't tell the disciples the time when he's going to come again. He just says, I'm coming, you won't miss me. All nations may have persecuted the church, but now all nations will see the Son of Man. The people who thought they were doing right in rejecting Jesus and in persecuting his people, they will mourn to see him. Even those like the scribes and Pharisees who were sincere in thinking they were doing God's will, but who didn't put Jesus at the center when he arrived in fulfillment of the prophecies, put their own religion there instead, they will mourn. Mourning because it's too late to do anything about it. Mourning because the moment that Jesus comes again is the end of the church age. It's the end of the gospel age. It's the end of the point where people can come to faith in Christ. Actually, there are 2 points. One is when you die, and the second one is when Jesus comes again. There's a warning in that. There's a challenge in that. And so these verses speak of a great divide, a great division of humanity. There's God's people who we read at the trumpet call of the angels will be gathered from all over the world. And there will be those who are left to mourn. All the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming. And he will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. I'm going to give a sneak peek at the verses that follow because it's hard not to. In chapter 24 and 36 to 51, there's a story of an unfaithful servant who doesn't keep watch while his master is away. And he gets up to no good, and then the master comes, and that's it. There are the unprepared wedding guests in chapter 25 and 1 to 13. A whole bunch of people who just didn't get ready for the bridegroom to return, gave up on him. There's a man who fails to look after his master's property while he's away. And then finally, there's the sheep and the goats in verses 31 of 25 onwards, representing all the peoples of the nation. So when the Son of Man returns, they will be separated, left and right. God's people, the others. Now, the words that Jesus uses about these people groups are, to use a modern word, chilling. The unprepared guests at the wedding, they say, "Lord, Lord, open the door for us." And Jesus says, "Truly, I tell you, I don't know you." I pray that nobody in this room would ever hear those words. I don't know you. And then the sheep and the goats ends with, They will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. This great divide of humanity. Those he will gather from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. And those to whom he will say, I don't know you. I don't know you. So let's look at the hopes that there are in the midst of these hard truths. First hope, Al's represented it beautifully for us today. Hope to look forward to. Jesus will come again. That's the light. That's the future. That's the amazing hope to hold on to. That whatever we see in the world, whatever is happening, Jesus is still in control. He's not overrun by what's happening, and he will come again. The second piece of hope is that the good news of Jesus will be preached to all nations. Depending on who you look at, Wycliffe Bible Translators, for instance, we're possibly half to 3/4 of the way through that, depending on whether you look at the number of translations out there or the number of peoples. And it's accelerating, and dear old AI that we love to hate so much is really helping them to get the good news out to more and more people groups more and more quickly. And they're using that to speed their translation process. I've particularly been involved in supporting people taking the Bible translation through the years of the hard manual work for it, through to now. And it's wonderful to see what God is doing amongst those people. The next piece of hope is the person who stands firm to the end will be saved. That's really, really significant. Okay, it suggests it's hard work standing firm, but you will be saved. And then God's people will be gathered from all the nations of the earth. So what can we do? Praise God that he will come again. Ask, how are we responding to the signs we see in our age? Is it alarm or is it action? How can we better support the church worldwide in its mission to bring the good news to all nations? And with a subtext to that, how do we better support the persecuted church in all of its struggles? But the most fundamental question is, will I be with Jesus when he comes again? Will I be with Jesus when he comes again? There are two readings. I'm sorry they're a little bit small, but I will read them out. The one is from Joel, prophecy of the end times. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. For on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be deliverance, as the Lord has said, even among the survivors whom the Lord calls. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. What an amazing promise and what amazing hope. And then the second one is about what awaits when we have passed through that second coming. From Revelation. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. The throne of God and of the Lamb will be in the city, and his servants will serve him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. There will be no more night. They will not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever. That's where the trumpet call from all the nations ends. And I'm hoping we've still got time for a hymn that really, or song rather, modern song, that really brings these things together. So enter into it and listen to the words, because I think it fits really well to end.